Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar for today. As everyone is joining the room, you'll notice that your microphones and your videos are off. So if you have any questions or thoughts throughout the presentation, please be sure to use the chat function. We're just going to give everyone a minute or so to get settled, but while we're waiting, it would be great if you could drop in the chat where you're from and to share a nature connection moment you've had lately. We have a lot of people tuning in from all over the world for this presentation. I think it would be really special to be able to share different nature moments that we're experiencing all over the place and just have that little moment of some good in the world. So drop in the chat your name, where you're tuning in from, and something special that's been a connection with nature lately. And then we'll get started in just a little bit. All right, so while everyone is joining and typing, we're going to get started. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Peter Soroye, who is our speaker for today. He is the Key Biodiversity Areas Assessment and Outreach Coordinator at Wildlife Conservation Society Canada. My name is Monica Seidel. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Manager at Watersheds Canada, and I'll be your sort of MC for today's event. You'll be with us for the next hour. And as I mentioned, chat is the best place to ask any questions, share any resources. If you have ideas of collaboration as you talk to different people in the chat, we really encourage this to be a knowledge sharing opportunity for people. And, that's the best way that we're able to facilitate the Q&A with the amount of people we're expecting for this call. So please make sure to use that chat and we'll get to your questions at the end of the presentation. To start us off, though, I would like to say that while Watersheds Canada partners with people from coast to coast to coast, I personally work and live on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe in Ottawa, Ontario. And I wanted to share my nature moment, which is that Ottawa has had a very snowy and cold winter, which I have chosen to embrace and spend a lot of time outside in the forest and just enjoying that quiet that comes in the wintertime in the forest. So this is near my house and just my little nature moment that's helped me get through some of the darker and just long days of winter. For myself personally, as a employee at Watersheds Canada, but also as a friend, a sibling, a daughter, I work very hard to honor the land that I am very grateful to live, play, and work on. And also the water that I am dependent on. Ottawa is really fortunate to have a lot of fresh water around it. And so I'm grateful to the caretakers who have ensured that I'm able to enjoy all of these areas. And I strive to work in relation with them and learn from others so that we're all able to protect nature together. For people on the call who may not be familiar with Watersheds Canada, we're a national nonprofit and registered Canadian charity. We focus on delivering different habitat restoration and education programs with a wide variety of community partners. I have just 3 examples on the slide here. We have shoreline planting programs like on the right. We have fish habitat restoration programs, which is the bottom left. That actually just took place last week, where we're restoring a historic walleye spawning bed. And then we also deliver traditional children and youth programming, including during summer camps and in classroom programming. And so the top left is with a group out in Buffalo Lake, Métis Settlement, Alberta. If you are new to our organization, we post regularly on all of our social media platforms, and we'd be really excited to have you follow along with our adventures, access our free resources, and also get involved in your own community to protect your local lakes, rivers, shorelines, and wetlands. So Nicole will be putting all of our socials in the chat, and you can follow us along. If, as you go poking through our website, you realize there is not a project currently being delivered in your area, there is still a way for you to get involved, and it's in a pretty fun way. We partner with different Canadian artists to go through our symbolic adoption program. And so what you can do, instead of receiving like a physical stuffed animal or something, we actually have it so that you receive a postcard with artwork of the species that you adopt. And so there are a number of freshwater and shoreline species that are featured from artists from across the country. And so if that's something that could be interesting, just to have something up by a desk or to give as a gift, we encourage you to check out watersheds.ca/gifts. And all symbolic adoptions receive a Canadian charitable income tax receipt as well. For the freshwater stewardship community, which is why we are here today, this is now a 6-year-old community, which is crazy to say. And we are so blessed to have had so many amazing speakers who have shared all of their knowledge with us over the years, and all of their recordings for the webinars and handouts and resources that were compiled from them are all available for free on our website. So when you registered for today's session, you might have not scrolled all the way down to the page, but there's actually some menu buttons, and you can look through different topics and find all of those back resources. So I encourage you to do that after today's webinar. And specifically for 2026, I want to say thank you to the Hodgson Family Foundation, which is ensuring that we can keep this community going for this year. And this is what our community looks like. It is a solely online community, so it sometimes can feel like we're doing things all on our own, but the community is international. And so each of these shapes that you're seeing just shows you where the biggest groupings of people are. So the bigger the shape, the more people that are in that area. And so obviously our biggest group of people is in Canada and the United States, but I think it's just so neat that so many people from around the world can connect with each other, and to know that we're not alone in these different freshwater efforts that we're all leading. So something to just carry with you as we go through today's session, but also in your day-to-day life, to know that you're not alone in all of this. One last plug for free things that we would like you to use and share with your community is our new e-library that we published late last year. This is 20 years worth of knowledge that's free for anyone to use and share. So you can go through our different programs and themes, tags, no matter what kind of hat you wear. If you're a parent, if you're an educator, a municipality, government official, waterfront property owner, there are free resources there for you. And so I encourage you to check that out and access all of those free materials. After today's wonderful webinar, we have another one coming up in a few weeks, which is going to be looking at alternatives to road salt. This will be taking place on Tuesday, March 3rd in the evening, so 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can now register for that on the page where you registered for today's session, which is watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. So with all of those announcements complete, I'm now excited to introduce our keynote speaker, which is, as I said, Dr. Peter Soroye, who is the Key Biodiversity Areas, or KBA, Assessment and Outreach Coordinator at Wildlife Conservation Society Canada. In this role, Peter supports the technical identification of KBAs and coordinates the outreach, engagement, and collaborations around Wildlife Conservation Society Canada's KBAs work. Peter completed his PhD in biology at the University of Ottawa, where his work focused on predicting the impacts of climate and land use change on North American and European pollinators. Peter's other main area of research interest is in community science, especially around how information gathered can be used to influence conservation and research. While most of Peter's research has been computational, he has also spent several field seasons catching invertebrates and reptiles in Canada and the United States. So I'll pass things over to you, Peter.
Hey, thank you so much, Monica. Really amazing to see so many resources from Watersheds Canada, and I'm really grateful to join today and be able to talk about the key biodiversity areas and this, what I think is a really cool tool to support conservation and work. I'm going to share my screen and replace the current share, and boom. Okay, I think that should pop up my slides there. Um, I'll also start off and say, yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm coming in from Ottawa today as well, in the traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. It's a beautiful sunny day, and my nature moment is, on the last couple of weeks, there's been a really nice looking pair of cardinals that every day at around 11 a.m. pops up in front of my window and bounces around in the tree there. So that's been a really fun nature moment for me recently. Um, I'm going to talk about key biodiversity areas, which is a tool for guiding conservation and stewardship. I thought it would be nice maybe to start off with a little bit about where I'm coming from. This key biodiversity area work is something I've been doing for the last 4.5 years about. And I think it's a really, really cool program, exciting program, hopefully one that's maybe relevant to the work that you're doing as well. And WCS Canada, Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, where I work, is a cool organization that does a bunch of other projects and work as well. We work across we work across Canada, and have been for the last couple of decades, but we're not super well known. So I thought it might be helpful to give a little introduction on who we are and what we do. Um, to put it really simply, Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada is an organization of scientists that has a really broad term, an increasingly broad term. And in addition to folks with PhDs and experience in kind of academia like myself, we also have a lot of really excellent knowledge holders, Indigenous knowledge holders, and folks with less conventional science backgrounds, but who are still, very focused on collecting evidence. And at WCS Canada, we try to use that to inform policy and decision making and conservation action. Basically, trying to give people the information and the tools that they need to do good work. We work across the country in a couple of kind of field place-based programs. Our work in the Western Arctic and in the northern mountains of BC and Yukon. Those programs have been going on for a little over 20 years now. Our Northern Ontario Boreal program has had a field presence, and the BAT program has had a field presence for over a decade as well, I believe. And so we do a neat mix of, folks on the ground here tracking the spread of white nose syndrome in bats across the prairies, for example, or measuring and monitoring marine noise in an increasingly warm and increasingly busy Arctic Ocean, trying to figure out how shipping noise is impacting marine mammals and things like that. And a lot of work with communities as well, First Nation, Indigenous communities, and others, trying to understand impacts of climate change and other changing how biodiversity is impacting communities and people as well. But in addition to these place-based work, we have a bunch of national programs. So we have a big program looking at forests and peatlands and climate change and trying to inform larger biodiversity policy and climate policy there. And we have programs like the Key Biodiversity Areas, which is part of a global program, like I'll explain, but also tied to very specific sites across the country. So that's a very brief overview of Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada and what we do. If that seems interesting, definitely check out our website and learn more, or feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to always chat more about some of the work we're doing or connect you to some of our other staff who might be working closer to where you are or more on topics of interest to you. But so that's where I'm coming from. And that's kind of the background of this work. Key biodiversity areas are a tool that we think is really exciting, that has a potential and is already starting to inform a lot of conservation work and stewardship work across the country. But it's founded on really high quality information and data and expert input. So I'll describe more about the KBAs, but that kind of gives a little bit of a background onto why we're doing this. So for the next, I guess, 30 minutes, I'll chat more in depth about what these key biodiversity areas are, or KBAs. I'll give a bit of a background on why they exist, why they were created, what they do. I'll talk about where they are across Canada, and especially focusing on some of these really cool freshwater sites. And then I'll talk about what the information is being used for, how we're starting to see it pop up into people's work and into conservation decision making and action already. And I'll talk about how, if you're interested, you can get more involved, maybe identifying KBAs or using KBA information. Spoiler, the information is public and everyone can access and download and use it for the things they want. But I'll give a little more detail on what exactly that means and how you can do it. But to start out, what are key biodiversity areas? What are KBAs? So to start with that, I think it's helpful to take a step back and think about why it's important to recognize and map places at all. So we're all acutely aware of that we're in a biodiversity crisis right now, and biodiversity nature in Canada and across the rest of the world is you're seeing a lot of declines and a lot of degradation across a lot of different facets and ways we can measure that. Extinction rates are super high, and one way that we've been trying to address these declines and restore populations and species is using area-based conservation measures and actions. So this doesn't need to just mean protected areas and setting aside different plots of lands or waters to for species to do their thing, for animals to do their thing. It can also mean more active management and stewardship of lands as well. But to effectively be able to conserve species and to plan in the long term and to use sometimes limited resources, it can be very helpful to understand what's there on the landscape and where the most important places are for different things that we care about. So over the last couple of decades, there have arisen a lot of different tools and approaches and frameworks and systems that try to basically map out some of the most important places for things that we care about in terms of biodiversity. You're probably familiar with a lot of tools. I have a couple of them up here, things like important bird areas and important reptile and amphibian areas and prime butterfly areas. You can think of things like Ramsar wetlands or UNESCO World Heritage Sites or biosphere regions or important marine mammal areas. There's lots of different types of systems and frameworks and tools that try to do this, and a lot of them take a very species specific or ecosystem specific approach. All of these tools, or most of them, the huge majority of them, have been really helpful in helping to inform planning and decision making. A lot of them are used and still today um, and do have a lot of positive impact in terms of supporting conservation work. But it's a really crowded space. And even though all these tools are helpful, if you want to figure out which one to use and when to use it, and for decision makers who are not as in the loop on science or in the loop on all the different variety and diversity of tools, it can be a bit of a confusing space to figure out what everything means and when you need to pay attention to what. So in the early 2000s, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, was getting a lot of requests from decision makers and from others. And so they came together and developed a global standard for the identification of key biodiversity areas. The idea of this standard was to try to take a lot of these species and ecosystem specific tools and approaches for identifying important places, to take a lot of them and put them under the same umbrella, try to simplify that space a little bit, so that instead of having 20 different tools for trying to identify important places, KBAs could account for 15 of those, and maybe you have a couple more that you still use. But KBAs can try to simplify that space and give us a single set of methods for identifying sites of importance for a couple different aspects of biodiversity that we care about. The goal of KBAs is that they're scientifically robust, they're very data driven, they're quantitative, but they cover a big range of biodiversity, from very charismatic and well-known species like caribou and polar bear to lesser known lichens and slugs and snails and things like that. And they also include ecosystems, so they're able to cover a pretty broad range of biodiversity values, and they give us information that we can use to inform decision making and action. Importantly, KBAs don't do anything by themselves. So when a site gets identified, it doesn't all of a sudden turn a place into a protected area. It doesn't all of a sudden change what people can do there or how things, how lands and waters can be used. But the idea is, with KBAs and with a lot of those other previous approaches, when we recognize sites as part of a especially global international network of places, this is a really important piece of information and a really useful piece of information that people can use to support the work that they're doing in really flexible ways. So KBAs can be used to, I'll talk a little bit more about how they're used, but that information basically gives people one more tool in the toolbox to help do the work that they're already doing. And because KBAs are a global tool, well, that gives them even more relevance to a lot of different types of uses and different scales where we might want to see them used. This map shows in green countries that are actively identifying key biodiversity areas. They all have national coordination groups like Canada. And then countries in orange and yellow here are at various stages of developing their national coordination groups and starting to identify KBAs as well. So there's, I think, about 60 countries, maybe a little more now, across the globe that are identifying KBAs, and they're identified the same way across all of them. So that gives them a really cool international standardization saying that Algonquin Park is a key biodiversity area in Ontario, which it is for Algonquin wolf. Means the same thing as when people identify KBAs for saltwater crocodile in Australia or cheetah in South Africa or something. Those are, I don't know if people are doing that, but it gives that, that same type of standardization and transferability. Canada's actually been a really big leader in KBAs as well. Since the global standards were published, we pretty much immediately started to work on KBAs. And we've now developed our own national standard as well. So we can also identify sites of importance for our uniquely Canadian biodiversity. We can identify KBAs for unique subspecies that are only found in Canada or recognized in Canada. And we can identify sites of national importance and significance as well. So that's really cool. And it's, at a global stage, Canada is really contributing and leading this work on identifying KBAs and developing and refining the methods for that. So that's a bit about where KBAs come from. But what exactly are they still? So the idea of KBAs is that they're very specific, discrete sites and places that are disproportionately important for supporting biodiversity or for preventing extinction loss. So KBAs can be identified across freshwater places, across marine systems, across terrestrial areas. We even have subterranean KBAs in caves that hold particularly unique and threatened biodiversity. And like I mentioned, they can cover a huge range of things from ecosystems to wide-ranging caribou to very small slugs and snails that do not travel far at all in their whole lifetime. But the one thing that all of these types of sites have in common, and the thing that every KBA has in common, is that it's a very specific place. And if it were lost or degraded, if that site were, if that site weren't conserved or protected or stewarded in some way, species or ecosystems could disappear from the planet or from the country forever. So that's what links all these KBAs, and that's what makes them such a exciting and cool network of places to map out and pay attention to. I won't spend too much detail today on the specific criteria and ways that we identify KBAs. It gets pretty technical and in the weeds. I'd love to chat about it if anyone's interested on another call. But for now, I'll just stick with letting everyone know that there's a couple for a site to be recognized as a KBA. It has to meet one or more very specific criteria. And proposing a site basically involves collecting evidence and expert input, knowledge holder input to demonstrate and kind of prove that a site meets one or more of these very specific criteria. There's a couple different types of KBAs that can be identified or criteria that can be met for KBAs. It's not just about holding a threatened species. It's also about geographically restricted species and places that are important for different biological processes or for ecosystems as well. And I'll to expand on that a little bit. So we have KBAs for things like polar bear and caribou, and I mentioned slugs and other types of animals. We can use kind of global threat status, or we can use national threat status as well, and kind of consider how things are doing within Canada in particular. So in some cases, we have KBAs for species that are not necessarily threatened or in decline globally, but in Canada, they might be really rare and their populations might be threatened or in flux. And so we can identify sites that are important for us to take care of here, but maybe not as important for our neighbors elsewhere. We can also identify KBAs for species that are not threatened per se. Maybe they're not declining, but they're just really rare. They're really, really funky, really unique. This is an example of a couple of species that kind of fit that criteria. This Claxodraba or Draba brucebenedi is the Latin name. This is a really beautiful alpine flower that's only found from two mountaintops in Yukon. It was recognized or only a couple of years ago, I think less than 10 years ago. But it's this kind of really beautiful flower that's only found in a couple places in Yukon. And this little bee, this striped bromeliad bee, similarly it's only found in a handful of places in Canada. I think less than seven locations. It's not threatened per se. We don't really know too much about it, but it's also just a really unique, interesting piece of biodiversity that's found in Grasslands National Park and a couple of other places. So we can identify KBAs for these species, even if they're not threatened per se. We can also identify KBAs for ecosystems. So this work is really just starting up and is still really new for us. But we're seeing KBAs identified for some of the really iconic Garry Oak ecosystems in southern Vancouver and southern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. We're seeing grasslands and aspen parklands and in the prairies. We're starting to take a look there to see if there are KBAs that can be identified for those kind of very threatened types of ecosystems. And then for ecosystems like alvars and dunes, especially in the Great Lakes area, we're recognizing some KBAs for those really globally rare ecosystems that we actually have quite a bit of in Canada. And finally, there are also sites that are not necessarily inhabited year-round by really interesting, unique species, but they're places where species are gathering at one or more times throughout the year for very specific purposes. So we're identifying sites for migration staging areas where birds might be stopping throughout their continental migrations to be able to feed or rest as they go along. We're identifying places for KBAs for hibernacula for snakes, where Canada has some of the largest hibernacula and gatherings of snakes in the world, actually. And we're identifying KBAs for salmon and other fish that are spawning and those specific kind of nursery or spawning areas that they're going to. The identification of KBAs, again, I won't go into too much in depth on this so I can get to other funner things, but identifying KBAs is a really interesting process. It's a really collaborative one. It's one that's really comprehensive. And as much as possible, we're trying to make sure that we're trying to develop information and create information that is as relevant as possible to the work that people are doing. So we really want to collaborate with anyone and everyone that's interested. We want to try to identify all the KBAs we can, and we want to make sure the work can immediately feed into the stuff people are doing and have an impact and support that stuff. Across Canada, there's a couple of organizations there's quite a few organizations, a really large community of people who are participating in the work to identify KBAs. Of course, I'm with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, but Birds Canada and NatureServe Canada are the two other organizations that kind of lead and drive the work within Canada. We're coordinating the effort to identify KBAs. Behind that, there's a larger group of many organizations that are engaging above and beyond with the KBA work. They're participating in trying to identify sites and sharing expertise. They're particularly invested in using the KBA data and seeing and have provided a lot of guidance in terms of the general approach of how we do this work in Canada and how we connect with people about this. And beyond those, organizations and governments and organizations, there's a huge community, thousands of people, of individuals across government and academia and within communities and within naturalist groups and other NGOs, thousands of people who have dedicated or contributed their time and expertise and knowledge to support the work to identify these sites. We have about 750 KBAs across Canada, and around each one, it requires really a huge amount of knowledge to kind of be able to propose these sites. And that's all built off this incredible community of experts that we've been able to engage with, experts and stakeholders and rights holders who we've really been able to engage with. And all that is just within Canada. Outside of Canada, I showed this map earlier. There's a global KBA partnership that helps coordinate the 60-odd other countries that are also identifying KBAs. So it's a truly, within Canada, a huge effort. And beyond that, it just gets exponentially larger in terms of the folks and brains that are involved. Again, the KBA process, I won't spend too much time on, but the thing I want to let people know is that it's a really iterative process. At every point, it's all about going back to expert input, to biodiversity data. It's a fairly long process. It tends to be kind of slow to identify a KBA, but that's because at every point we're trying to connect with the folks who know these places, who are in these places, and we're trying to make sure there's lots of opportunities to add knowledge and to engage with the identification of sites. At the end, KBA information is made public on the website on kbacanada.org. There's information on KBAs here, and then all the data is available to access and download. Every month, we're adding new KBAs and new sites are being published. So it's to pay attention to it if you're interested. It's a really cool site. We're also adding new features as well this year. There'll be some interesting kind of dashboards to summarize data and kind of analyze what's going on within KBAs. And if there's ever anything you can't find on the website, reach out. We're always happy to send specific data cuts and specific kinds of information and things there as well. So definitely recommend checking it out. There's always a lot going on there. But I won't force you to check it out right now. While we're here, I can give you a little sneak peek and kind of show you what's going on myself. So um, I'll give a bit of overview on where we're at with identifying KBAs, and then I'll zoom into some of the freshwater KBAs and some of those sites. Um, if this is interesting, definitely check out our KBA annual report, which we released last week. It's really exciting. It kind of, yeah, summarizes our work from the last year. And so if you want more detail on kind of the stuff we're doing and stuff that's going on within KBAs, definitely check that out. But this is kind of a map of all the KBAs that we have scoped or that we think can be identified across Canada at the moment. There's about 760, probably 800 by the time we get to the end of the year sites. They cover about 5% of Canada. Each KBA has, they're just dots on this map, so they're a little easier to see. But every KBA is a very specific polygon. So they're all very specific areas that are mapped out. And when we sum up the area, it adds up to about 5% of Canada's lands and waters, which yeah, gives an idea of just how many of these really critical sites there are. There's a huge diversity. These photos are showing little snapshots of different KBAs, from the Arctic and Nunavut to Fraser River to the grasslands of Saskatchewan. So it's a really cool, interesting set of sites, and I'll give a couple more examples later on. In terms of the species that are being looked at or that are being focused on and that meet KBA criteria, there's about 760 that are meeting criteria within KBAs. A lot of these tend to be plants and vertebrates. This is because we have more data for plants and vertebrates than for other species, but there's a really cool diversity of species being recognized within KBAs. A lot of lichen, relatively speaking, a lot of lichens, and a lot of freshwater mussels and butterflies and a fair amount of other invertebrates and stuff as well. Yeah, it's worth noting that a lot of the important bird area program was kind of a big forerunner for the key biodiversity areas, and so a lot of those important bird sites, which people might be familiar with, are also KBAs and are being shifted into that program as well. So a lot of this 17.9% of birds that have KBAs identified for them, a lot of those are based off that older network of sites and the incredible amounts of data that people collected around them. There's looking at land cover of KBAs. There's a neat mix. Of course, a lot of water, and we'll zoom into that. But a lot of forest cover. What I find interesting is there's a pretty significant amount of cropland and urban and built up area within KBAs as well. And this I find really interesting because, to me, it's so exciting that KBAs are not just these far-flung, inaccessible places in the far north. It's also a lot of places that are very accessible to people. A lot of places that are sometimes going right through cities, or within a short drive of urban centers. And these places might be accessible. They might have urban land cover and cropland, but they're still really critical for a lot of species and providing a lot of really key habitat and space for some really cool animals and plants and fungi. But zooming into the water, there are about 44% of published KBAs that have a freshwater focus. This means that one or more species within them relies on freshwater or at that site. That makes up about 358 species. The numbers are a little abstract, but this map shows a little bit of an overview of. So this is just the sites on the website. I expect there'll be a couple hundred more that get added by the end of the year. But this is showing across Canada all of the freshwater KBAs or freshwater focused KBAs that we've identified to date. And I've circled a few because I'm going to dive in and give a little bit more info or spotlight on some of those circled sites there. Oh, those slides should have been in the other order, but yeah. So starting off with Canadian Lake Superior, obviously one of the Great Lakes. little known or something I didn't know before, but Lake Superior is also the only place in the world where the key fish is found. And it's the only place in Canada where there's a unique subspecies of pygmy whitefish within as well. So of course, Lake Superior important for a million and one reasons, for, a huge amount of species, but two species there are found nowhere else in the country and one nowhere else in the world, which I think is so, so cool. Um, another site going to the other side of the country and in BC and southern Vancouver Island, Cowichan, Mesashi, and Bear Lakes. Sorry. This is the only place in the world with Vancouver lamprey, which is not a super cute looking species, but is a really unique and interesting piece of biodiversity. This is an important site for a lot of salmon and trout as well, and many other species, but it's a key biodiversity area because if these lakes were lost, or if they were degraded, then we would lose that Vancouver lamprey from the planet. So a really important place for that. In Manitoba, Rat River, south of Winnipeg. This is a nationally significant site for maple leaf mussel, a specific subspecies of maple leaf mussel. Also a nationally significant site for another plant, fascicled ironweed, but a really cool site. And Frank Lake South in Alberta, south of Calgary, one of the most important breeding sites for breeding birds in southwestern Alberta. We see a nationally significant, or sorry, a globally significant um, aggregation of Franklin's gull that breeds here every year. Trumpeter swan stage here in the fall and the spring for migration. And I believe it's a nationally significant spot for bank swallow as well. Of course, hundreds of other species that visit it every year as well, but it meets criteria for those three. A little closer to my home, a site that's pretty close to my heart, is Marlborough Forest. This is a really cool site. Has a couple of pathways you can kind of walk through. It's a pretty accessible site for those in Ottawa and the Ottawa Valley. It also happens to be one of two fens in Canada, two wetlands in Canada where bogbean buck moth is found. That's this little butterfly, little moth, sorry, in the photo there. Really beautiful. It's a pretty big one, about the size of your thumb, 2 or 3 inches long, maybe. Really, it flies in the day. Really cool butterfly to see. And this is one of only two places in Canada where you can see it. So, who would have thought? I had no idea when I first started this work, but it's yeah, really important site, Marlborough Forest, for a couple of different species. Pauline's turtle as well, or Blanding's turtle as well. Um, and then another one, I had to bias it a little bit towards kind of Ottawa Valley, but Mississippi River, which is a smaller river in Ontario, smaller relatively to the Great Mississippi River in the U.S. But this is a really critical site for Rapids clubtail dragonfly, one of the only places in Canada where it's found, and just another great example of a kind of lesser known species and site, but that is kind of being recognized through this KBA program. If you look into the website for freshwater KBAs, one thing you won't see yet is a lot of KBAs for Atlantic salmon or Pacific salmon. We're just starting that work to identify important sites for these fish. In Atlantic Canada, we have about a dozen sites on the radar at the moment, from the Lahave to the Margaree, the Miramichi, St. Mary's River, Nashwaak, Restigouche. If this is a place you're working or interested in, definitely reach out. We're always looking to connect with people at these sites. We're still in the early stages of trying to delineate them and figure out numbers of these different populations of salmon that flow through these rivers. So definitely reach out if you're interested. Similar in BC, if you are a big salmon person there, please do reach out. We're starting to work to identify again, about a couple dozen KBAs for Pacific salmon, starting with sockeye and the Fraser River drainage. And some of the sites on the list at the moment include Fraser River Estuary, Chehalis, Anderson Seton, South Okanagan, of course, looking at places like Shuswap and yeah, so really cool set of sites. And if this is your jam, then please do reach out. We're really happy to connect always. So that's a bit of a whirlwind overview of KBAs across Canada, or freshwater KBAs. There's so much more there. So definitely check out the website or reach out if you want to learn more. But in the interest of time, I'll kind of shift now and talk about what does this mean? Like, what do we use this information for? What can it be used for? So I'll talk a little bit about, yeah, how this information is being used, and then maybe how you specifically might want to engage with KBAs or start to use that as well. So as a piece of information, as one more kind of tool in the toolbox, KBAs are a really helpful building block for conservation in Canada. So they're a really good, that they're a supporting piece of information. If you're doing work, if you're doing planning or even submitting proposals for funding for stewardship or monitoring, KBAs can be a great addition to those proposals or a great thing to kind of feed into those data layers or spatial work that you're doing. We're seeing KBAs informing planning for protected areas and other things being used by the government at different levels in the provinces and some of the provinces and at the federal level as well. We're seeing Indigenous communities use KBAs to support work for Indigenous-led conservation. We're seeing KBAs start to guide land use planning or consultation. They're informing proposals. Funders are using KBAs as well. They're attracting ecotourism. So a huge range. I won't list off every single thing, but I will dive into a little more specific detail as well. So we're seeing a lot of interest from some of the federal government, especially Environment and Climate Change Canada, and using KBAs. They've been really eager and excited to use KBAs for a couple of years now, as they try to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030. KBAs are one of the pieces of information they're using to make sure that that protection goes to the places that need it most. So instead of protecting a huge amount of lands and waters that are maybe not so valuable in a biodiversity sense, they're trying to target protection to KBAs to make sure that it's the most important places that are being protected as we try to meet that 30 by 30 goal. We're also seeing KBAs start to feed into regional assessments for different types of wind development in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador, and generally elsewhere in the nature strategy when looking at focal sites for restoration, for example, and other things. KBAs are a helpful layer to kind of feed into those types of planning and policy work. At a more local level, we're seeing KBAs start to inform development and planning, or at least a lot of advocacy around development and planning. So we're seeing different folks like BC Wildlife Federation or around Frank Lake, different caretakers and naturalists use KBAs to push back or add to the discussion and advocate for effective or advocate for proper kind of conservation and management of different sites. So in BC, the BC Wildlife Federation cited KBAs as one of the reasons that a KBA there, a site there, should not be considered for different energy development. And similarly in Alberta, the KBA and kind of the global and national significance of that place and designation was cited as one of the reasons that the development project shouldn't move forward within that KBA. It would have caused a lot of damage to the biodiversity there. So KBAs are a helpful tool for, again, supporting that type of advocacy, supporting that type of conscientious planning and development. In the realms of Indigenous-led conservation, something that I think is really exciting, really important, and probably the only way we're going to be able to conserve and avoid the loss of our species in the long term. KBAs are being able to help support a lot of communities in that way as well. So we're seeing in BC, the Kitasoo Stewardship Authority is leading the development of a KBA in one of the marine protected areas that they've proposed. And so the KBA will help them get some more recognition from the federal government and to others internationally as well, as to why it's so important to protect that area and to support their Indigenous-led conservation of it. Similarly, in New Brunswick, McMowell Plutonic Incorporated, MTI, is using KBAs to support and inform some of their ongoing IPCA work and projects across the province. And we're seeing different other communities as well use KBAs for specific projects that they're doing, whether it's kind of habitat assessments or supporting other types of stewardship work as well. So yeah, KBAs can might be an exciting tool. And if you think that they might be helpful for some of the work you're doing, please reach out. I'd love to chat more. We can always, if you can't get exactly the data you're looking for on the KBA website, we can always provide more data. We can provide data on candidate KBAs as well if there's a site that you want to learn more about. If you're interested in helping identify sites, if there's a place near you you think we've missed, or if there's a site on the dashboard that you want to learn more about, then let us know. Um, and in the longer term as well, all of these sites in some way or another should probably be stewarded or conserved in some way. That doesn't necessarily mean having a new park there or some type of protected area, but maybe it just means having a network of volunteers and folks around it who can monitor and watch the site. Or a lot of sites are already being very well stewarded and very well taken care of by communities and groups around them. So ultimately, the WCS and the KBA Canada program in general, we want to be able to support and advocate for that type of conservation and that type of stewardship around sites. So if there's an interest, if there's things we can do to help support, let us know. We've also developed iNaturalist and eBird projects for all the KBAs as well. So if monitoring is your thing or going out and looking for species is your thing, definitely go contribute to that. This is a snapshot of the Key Biodiversity Areas iNaturalist page. There's an overall project, which is this one here, and then every site has its own page as well. So if there's a KBA on the website, definitely go check it out, see if there's and contribute to that project. It's adding, we use a lot of iNaturalist data within our work as well to identify sites, and we're seeing it start to play a really big role uh, in terms of understanding the broader trends of biodiversity within these sites too. So definitely, if that's your jam, uh, please do participate in those as well. So on that note, I'll kind of leave it off there. I'd like to give a huge thanks to my team at WCS Canada and my colleagues elsewhere as well at Birds Canada and NatureServe Canada, all our past coordinators and all the other folks who have been involved over the last couple of years helping to identify KBAs. Um, Final note, definitely check out our website, kbacanada.org, if that's of interest, and reach out to me if there's more you want to chat about. Always happy to chat with people, to make introductions with others if that's something we can do. So yeah, I'll turn it over. I think we have a couple minutes, hopefully a couple minutes for questions, but yeah, thanks for listening. Really appreciate the opportunity and hope you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. We do have lots of questions that have come through. So a couple are admin side, so I'll address those first. People were wanting to know if they're getting a recording, which you are next week. We have the stat holiday here in Ontario on Monday, so we'll get that to you kind of mid next week. And you'll also get a summary handout with all of the key links that Peter has been sharing, as well as some of the information for next steps. So all of that's coming to you if you have not been typing and you're worried that you won't get everything. It's coming to you next week. As well, on the admin side, Nicole is going to be dropping in a link for a really short survey. People can let us know how today was, if you have other topics you're interested in as we plan our speaker series for 2026, that is the place to tell us. So we'll get into the questions now. I'll try to group them together so we can cover as many as possible. So one of them is sort of the process of KBAs. So how long does it take to get a designation, and do they keep the designation in perpetuity, or do they need to be reassessed? Who's responsible for that kind of framework?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I didn't go into too much detail on that, but generally we're seeing generally it takes about a year from the very start of the KBA identification process to seeing it published on the website. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less time. If there's a lot of the most complex sites, thinking of like Fraser River Estuary, it took quite a long time to kind of propose that KBA. There's a lot of data there, so that made it a little easier, but there's so many people who also need to be involved and should be involved in developing in recognizing that type of site and developing a proposal there. So it took a long time, and now we're on, I think, version 3 of that proposal as well, because we also, are adding new species there and things there too. So yeah, I think on average it takes about a year, sometimes more, if there's a ton of people and they don't tend and they're super busy and not responsive. Other times, in the ideal, it can take a couple months maybe to identify KBA if it's a group of people who kind of know everything and everybody's super responsive and yeah, so it depends a little bit, but up to a year. Um, in terms of reassessing sites, the idea of KBAs is that they're kind of a snapshot from like the current state of KBAs. So they're highlighting places that are important now and that will be important over the next at least 10 years. The goal for KBAs is that every 8 to 12 years they're reassessed. And so we kind of go back to every single site. We kind of, again, try to collect updated data, get new numbers on abundance, make sure that those sites still meet KBA criteria. Maybe a site has declined, the population, maybe a site's degraded and it no longer meets KBA criteria, or maybe a population, a new species is there and or a population is increased and there's new species meeting KBA criteria. So yeah, the sites get reassessed every 8 to 12 years. And that kind of keeps it a little bit of a living database as well. So it's, hopefully won't get out of date.
Great. There were some questions about how to involve different stakeholders. So people are saying, they belong to a nature group, so they're easy to try and bring on board with this idea. But do you have any experience with maybe less traditional partners, like bringing in industry and how to have those types of conversations where it's still beneficial for everyone, but still
Mhm.
prioritizing the protection?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're kind of with the KBAs, we're kind of lucky in a way because we're it's a really quantitative process, and so in with other types of frameworks, you might be trying to argue for everyone to recognize the importance of a place. With KBAs, it's very data driven. So if you collect the data and a site meets the criteria, then it's a KBA, and it's just a matter of kind of checking the validity of those numbers and getting expert input and peer review to show that yeah, these are valid, this makes sense, and you can kind of have that checked at different levels. And so you kind of that makes it a lot easier to involve some folks like industry where it's, you're not trying to go back and forth with them on why and trying to argue about why things are important. You're just trying to collect the best available data on species and sites, and then you're trying to recognize sites in a way that makes sense and kind of highlights the different threats and conservation work that's going on in different ways. So we've had generally not a huge amount of interest from industry in helping identify KBAs. We've had a bit of interest in terms of folks using KBAs for different planning and things there. But we have had a lot of interest from for example, um, we have had some interest from folks in terms of like identifying the KBAs. Folks might not have specific numbers, but they can really help paint the picture of like what's going on in these places and highlight the different things going on there.
Great. Next one is about involving community. So people are wondering if there's some sort of scorecard or something where we could get a group of people to go out and try and see if a local area would maybe qualify towards a KBA.
hmm Yeah, neat. Yeah, there's, I mean, definitely like monitoring. A lot of the bird KBAs rely a lot on data from eBird and things there. So if you're a birder, um, sorry. If you're a birder, any data you collect and submit to eBird goes right to there, similar with like Marsh Monitoring Program or Christmas Bird Count. Anything that goes into Birds Canada's Nature Counts database is immediately going into to KBA identification. Similar for iNaturalist, we kind of pull in all the data from iNaturalist. The challenge with KBAs is we need pretty detailed data, so often we'll go to community science data sets like iNaturalist and eBird, but unless there's abundance data associated with those observations, it can be a little challenging to use that for KBA identification. It will probably still feed into helping identify what the boundaries of a site should be, or it can be helpful for identifying for rare species that, yeah, this is still there. But yeah, definitely in terms of monitoring, community science is great. If you have experience with kind of more advanced or kind of complex type of monitoring techniques or survey techniques, then reach out to us, and we're happy to see. We have a list of sites and species that are we call MABAs or wanted species, and those are places that might be KBAs, but we need a little bit more data, and they maybe just haven't been visited in a while, or maybe it's like a super rare, really cryptic type of species that is super hard to find and hasn't been seen in 30 years. But so yeah, definitely reach out. It can be a little hard to challenge to survey for KBAs because we need that abundance data. But it's definitely if that's something you have experience in, always happy to chat and see if we can provide some guidance and direction. The other thing I would say is there is Birds Canada with their important bird area program, and now at the KBAs is creating this caretaker program. And so the idea of that is that it's volunteers, maybe individuals or maybe organizations, or maybe communities as well, who are kind of stewards or caretakers of a KBA. And what that means is they just at least once a year are kind of going out to monitor, and then also tracking the condition of the site. So they'll say, if at the end of the year there were some new developments within a site and maybe some of the habitat was converted, a caretaker can kind of log that and monitor that. And they've been able to kind of, take a pretty good look at KBAs over time. So if that's something that's of interest, then again, reach out, and we're always looking for those eager stewards who care about these places and want to protect them.
Okay, all right. We've gotten a couple of different questions, specific examples of where people are located, and they're worried about things that are happening in their community, whether this is development, priorities of the government. And so I think I'll sum it up as, is there any type of legal protection, or the example you shared where the wind farm was, the KBA was used as a tool. So is there a way to use them beyond just a title?
Yeah, not unfortunately, no. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, no. Like the KBAs at the end of the day, they don't have teeth. So like I mentioned, when a site gets identified, it doesn't automatically become protected. Even in the case of those KBAs being used within those or cited within those federal wind development strategies, it's more about just highlighting KBAs as places to avoid for development. So it provides like a guidance, but not a strict like legal rule. There's still obviously that would come into play later on in later stages of development, but KBAs still don't have teeth. And that's so, to some people who are like really desperately looking for ways to protect and conserve specific places, that can be a bummer. But on the flip side, it makes it really flexible to identify KBAs and use KBAs. It means that we can identify KBAs across private lands, across public lands, and protected and unprotected lands. I saw that as a question in the chat. So KBAs are identified regardless of what the specific land tenure or ownership is. It's really just about kind of the ecological attributes and highlighting those places that are important for specific species and ecosystems. And because KBAs don't have teeth, it's a lot easier to be able to identify them in that sort of way and provide a really clear, um, you know, objective kind of scientific layer that shows what's happening on the landscape and not necessarily what's happening within kind of, within other factors and things there. So that's a bit of a two-sided coin or whatever. KBAs being flexible and not having that teeth also means that it's a lot easier to engage other people within the KBA program as well. So a lot of Indigenous communities that, wouldn't want to see KBAs exclude them from areas and necessarily there's a lot of baggage around those kind of really strict prescriptive frameworks. KBAs are a really flexible thing, so they don't come with a lot of that. So we're seeing a lot of really great buy-in from different communities and landowners and farmers and ranchers as well who want to see places recognized but don't necessarily want to see what they can do be limited or see like really strict prescriptions as well. So two-sided coin, but I think it's for the best that the KBAs are a little more flexible and can be that information tool.
Okay, I think that's a good lead into the next question, which is people are looking for concrete first steps. So if they are a landowner and
Mhm.
either on their own property or they have a place in mind in their community, what, besides maybe emailing you, what would be most likely to be the first couple of steps if they had an area in mind to become a KBA.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I mean, emailing is easy, but check out the KBA website, see a little more about the KBA criteria. They're pretty specific, and a lot of places that might be really important might not necessarily qualify for KBA still, especially considering that, KBAs are identifying nationally significant spots. So there's different places where provincially rare species might not meet KBA criteria because they're common in other provinces and other things there. So maybe first step, check out the KBA website, see a little more about the criteria. There's an about page which has some more information about how those sites are identified, and then the national KBA standard is probably the go-to place if you're interested about specific criteria and things there. Um, the other thing I would say, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. Like it can be a really quick question, easy to set up a call and just kind of chat things through as well. Um, and yeah, those are maybe some good steps. If you're not already connected to like your local kind of naturalist group or something there, they may have some additional information and on specific places and things there too. But yeah, I think those are probably some good couple first steps to go through.
Great. Our last question is for, I think, you specifically. It's asking where you would like to see KBAs going. Is there like a dream you have for them or a way that you want them to get adopted into other things? What do you see them
Hmm.
becoming?
Yeah, I think KBAs are a really exciting tool because they have this global, especially that international aspect to them as well, and kind of that standardization across, across the globe. I think it's a really neat data set for highlighting some of those most important places for species, those disproportionately important ones. I'd love to see, like, we're already starting to see KBAs. And I mentioned, like, as we kind of go towards 30 by 30 and the federal government tries to protect different areas and provinces and territories try to protect different areas, KBAs are starting to feed into that to make sure that we're, not just protecting big open spaces that are already kind of well represented in our protected area network, but we're making sure protected areas are being targeted towards these places. I'd love to see more of that of KB's, factoring into things like impact assessment, where maybe there's a stronger kind of guidance in terms of like when industry wants to pursue some type of development, they really have to really strongly consider KBAs and kind of and work around that as well. So I'd love to see more of, yeah, KBAs getting integrated into some of those bigger things. But really, I think what I'd most love to see is KBAs getting picked up at local levels as well. I think they have a really great opportunity for the groups that are working and working and recreating around these really specific sites. KBAs can be a really cool badge to just like, say how just kind of celebrate how important these areas are and how important the work is that people are doing around them. So I'd love to see kind of groups like, more groups use KBAs as like a badge of honor and kind of like use those within the advocacy and work that they're doing too. I think, that's kind of what the KBAs are there for too, is trying to tell these stories and celebrate the work that people are doing.
Amazing. With that, I want to say a very big thank you for your time, Peter, and for an excellent presentation. There's lots of really positive comments. I saw people clapping with the emojis, just people really excited to dig more into this framework. And so just really grateful for your time and sharing your knowledge with us. We're going to be sending out everything to everyone next week. So again, you'll get a handout with all of the main points, all of the main links, and then the recording. And Nicole's going to put in that survey link one more time. So if you don't mind just giving us a little bit of your feedback so that we can know how we did, but then also inform future webinars, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you so much, Monica and Nicole, for the invitation and for the webinar as well.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.